Okay, platelets are responsible for clotting blood. And your white blood cells, which are these guys, okay, these 5 things, these are all responsible for your immune system, okay? So I, just as a fun analogy, like to use the Pac-Man term because Pac-Man eats things. And we have a bunch of different Pac-Mans in our body, and each Pac-Man is designed to eat something different. And you're looking at 5 of them right here. Okay, these are 5 different types of Pac-Mans, which are part of your immune system, and their job is to protect you. So they eat the bad guys, okay? And then you have the formed elements, which are your red blood cells. And the red blood cells are designed to transport oxygen throughout your body. Okay, we just talked about this, what's found in plasma. Okay, the proteins found in plasma, their function is, and write down carrier. Okay, they are a carrier. It's hard to write with a mouse, so I'm not going to spell it out. Just write down carrier. Okay. So it means they are considered a carrier protein. All right, so these are carrier proteins. And they are the albumin, globulins are the main carriers, and then you have this other one called fibrinogen. Okay, so the way you look at a carrier is you can look at it like a vehicle. Okay, like an Uber, taxi, all right? So this vehicle is a carrier protein, and you are going to get in the vehicle, and it is going to carry you from point A to point B. That is what albumin and globulin will do. It helps transport certain molecules throughout circulation, like fatty acids, bilirubin, hormones. Okay, the globulins transport fats, carbohydrates, hormones, ions, antibodies, complement, which is complement's part of your immune system. So another Pac-Man. And the reason why things have to get inside of the vehicle is so that they're not denatured as they travel throughout your body. Okay, so if all these things like thyroid hormone were to travel by itself, it would get denatured. So it gets inside of a carrier protein like albumin, and it's transported from point A to point B so that it does not get denatured. Fibrinogen is a protein that helps form blood clotting. Okay, so that's found in the plasma. Your erythrocytes, so erythro means red, cyte means cell, so these are your red blood cells. Okay, and we can measure this. We can take your blood and measure it. If we want to see how many red blood cells you have, that's called hematocrit. Okay, this is simply how many red blood cells you have per cubic millimeter. That's your hematocrit. How many red blood cells you have per cubic millimeter. Okay, your white blood cells, these are your Pac-Mans. Okay, so the white blood cells are part of your immune system. So erythrocytes, also known as red blood cells. Okay, their function, and write this down here, their function is to transport oxygen. Okay, erythrocytes' function is to transport oxygen. Okay, leukocytes, also known as white blood cells. Okay, leukocytes, also known as white blood cells. Okay, so leuco means white, cyte means cell, so these are known as your white blood cells. Okay, their function is defense. Their function is defense. Okay, platelets, all right. Platelets' function is to help you clot blood. Okay, so write that here. Platelet function is to help you clot blood. If you get cut or you start bleeding, you want your platelets to kick in to help you stop the bleeding. Okay, so that would be to clot blood. Okay, erythropoiesis is your body's ability to make red blood cells. Erythropoiesis, so remember, erythro means red, okay, and poiesis is the making of something. So your body is constantly producing red blood cells. And the way it does this is through this process called erythropoiesis. A red blood cell lasts about 120 days. After that, they die. They are anucleated, which means they do not, so write this here, anucleated means they do not have a nucleus. Red blood cells do not have a nucleus. And the reason why is because a nucleus requires the use of oxygen. If a cell has a nucleus, that means it is using oxygen. Okay, so if a red blood cell has oxygen attached to it, and the oxygen is being used by the red blood cell itself, then that would not be good for your tissue, because our tissue, our hearts, our muscles, like everything needs oxygen, right? So if a red blood cell is utilizing the oxygen that's bound to it, then that defeats the purpose. So they're anucleated. So, and the advantage of that is the red blood cell will not use up the oxygen that's bound to it. Okay, the hormone that is responsible for making your red blood cells is called erythropoietin. Okay, don't confuse that with erythropoiesis. They sound similar. Erythropoietin is the hormone that makes your red blood cells. Erythropoiesis is the process of making your red blood cells. And the way we make our red blood cells, or one of the stimulus, is decreased oxygen. Okay, so if your body thinks it's being deprived of oxygen, then the kidneys release erythropoietin, which is the hormone, which goes to the bone marrow, which makes the red blood cells and puts them into circulation, which increases your oxygen carrying capacity. Okay, HB is short for hemoglobin. Okay, so write that here, hemoglobin. All right, hemoglobin's job is to transport oxygen. Hemoglobin's job is to transport oxygen. Hemoglobin does contain iron, so iron is part of the ingredient that helps make this. Okay, so the way you can look at it is, here's a red blood cell. There's a hemoglobin, and it has 4 oxygen binding sites. Okay, so one hemoglobin can have 4 oxygen bound to it. Okay, you need iron as one of the ingredients to help make the hemoglobin. Okay, the white blood cells that we looked at earlier are neutrophils, lymphocytes, monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. Okay, their overall function is defense, immune system defense. Okay, the fancy way of saying that is phago. They are phagocytes. Phagocytes. This is a fancy word for they eat the bad guys. So their overall function is phagocytosis. They eat the bad guys, defense, part of your immune system. Okay, here's what these would look like under a microscope. So here's your red blood cell. Okay, no nucleus. Here's your white blood cells. Here's what a neutrophil would look like. Here's what a basophil looks like, an eosinophil, a lymphocyte, and a monocyte, and a platelet. Okay, so these leukocytes, which are also known as white blood cells, fight bacteria, viruses, parasites, tumor cells, and are part of the inflammatory response. So what happens is in your blood vessels, okay, in your tubes, all right, so here's a blood vessel or a tube, and inside of this blood vessel is blood. Well, you have these Pac-Mans floating around in your blood, okay? What happens is if bacteria enters into that site in your tissue, that bacteria sends out a chemical signal. That's called chemotaxis. And so what happens is the Pac-Man is attracted to that chemical signal, so it migrates to the site, which means it has to leave the blood vessel. That leaving is called diapedesis, where the Pac-Man leaves the bloodstream and goes to the site so it can start to destroy the bad guy. Okay, red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets. Here's another microscope view of it. Red blood cells, all those are red blood cells. These little dots, those are platelets. Okay, little dots all over the place. Okay, those are platelets. And then white blood cell. And if there was a bad guy, like a bacteria, this would eat it. Okay, don't worry about this page. All right, platelets. Remember, they're designed to clot blood. Okay, platelets' job is to help prevent blood loss. So they form a plug. Okay, they form a plug. These plugs seal up small breaks in blood vessels. The key word here is small. So your super tiny, super small injuries, your body repairs them by activating. So the positive symbol there means activate, by activating the platelet plug activity. So if you have a blood vessel and that blood vessel has a little break in it, okay, blood would leak out. So you're bleeding. Your body goes, no problem, I can seal that up by creating a plug. So the platelets form a plug and seal up the hole. And here is an example of that. Injury, and the platelets come in and they form this plug formation so that the tissue can eventually heal. Okay, coagulation happens when the damage is, it's a more severe injury. Okay, so when the blood vessel is damaged more severely. Your goal with coagulation, which is a form of stopping bleeding, is to create this fibrin. That's the long-term goal. You need the fibrin to come in. Okay. Fibrin traps the blood cells, the platelets, and fluids. Here's the fibrin. Okay, all the yellow stuff that you see here, that's fibrin. You can almost look at it as a spider web where it's designed to catch anything that tries to get through it. It's sticky. You also need vitamin K to help you clot. All right, if you are deficient in vitamin K, you're going to have a hard time clotting blood. Okay. Too much antibiotic therapy can actually deplete the good bacteria in your body, which can cause vitamin K problems. Okay. So if you're on too much antibiotic therapy over a long period of time, you've hurt the good bacteria in your body because of that. Vitamin K can be, you can be, and then become deficient in vitamin K because of that. So if that's the case, then it's very simple. You just supplement with vitamin K and you take probiotics, get the good bacteria back into your system. Very, very simple. Okay, with infants, they want to do a vitamin K shot, okay? But also feeding, okay, once you feed that newborn, that also starts to produce good intestinal bacteria, which also activates vitamin K, and then they will naturally form their own way of clotting blood. Okay, our blood groups or blood types is what we're getting ready to get into. Okay, transfusion is the transfer of blood into another person. Okay, and that's not to be confused with infusion. Okay, so when you infuse somebody, you are putting like saline or whatever, any other fluid other than blood into a person. All right, but when you're doing a transfusion, it's blood or blood components are being put into another person. Okay, early transfusions, so years ago, transfusions were unsuccessful because of this antigen-antibody reaction. They didn't really understand blood types. I think until the 1950s, they started to figure that out. Okay, so what happens is, I'm going to jump to the picture. All those slides I just skipped is explained right here on this picture. Okay, so first of all, we have blood types. Okay, and they're type A, type B, type AB, and type O. Okay, if you are type A, it's because you have these type A antigen markers on your red blood cells. Okay, so if we take your blood, look at it under a microscope, you will see certain markers on your red blood cell. And if they're shaped like this, you're considered type A. If they're shaped like these cones, you're considered type B. If you have both, you are type AB. And if you don't have any, you're type O. Okay. The other one to add to this is what's called Rh factor. Right? If you have Rh, then you are A positive or B positive. If you're AB blood and you have Rh, then you're B positive. And if you're type O blood and you have Rh as well, then you're O positive. So the symbol is just letting us know that you have Rh or you don't. If you don't have it, then you're negative. Okay? It's just a blood type. If you do not have Rh factor and you are type A, then you're A negative. If you do not have Rh factor and you're type B, then you're B negative. So all you do is add the symbol. Okay, you add positive or negative. If you have Rh, then you mark positive. If you don't have it, you mark negative. Okay, the Rh comes from Reese's monkey. Okay, so when they were studying all this stuff and they were using monkeys to do it, they found some cool things like, oh, and because it was a Reese's, they're like, well, let's just call it Rh. So thus it stuck. Most people are Rh positive. Okay, about 15% of people are Rh negative. I happen to be a very rare blood type. I'm A negative. Okay, a thrombus is a clot that develops Okay, so this is an unhealthy form of a clot. Now remember, the healthy form of a clot is if you are bleeding and you need your body to stop bleeding. Okay, that's fine, that's a healthy form. The unhealthy form of a clot is called a thrombus. So here's a blood vessel, and a thrombus starts to form, which is not good. If that breaks free, now it's floating around in your body, that's called an embolus. It's where the thrombus breaks away and now free floats in the bloodstream. And it can get stuck somewhere, and if it gets stuck, that's your stroke, that's your heart attack, cerebral emboli, pulmonary embolism, so not good. Some of the reasons people will get a thrombus is because of too much inflammation over time. Okay, this creates rough vessels. You want your blood vessels on the inside to be smooth and continuous. If the blood vessels become rough and bumpy, okay, that starts to damage the blood vessel wall, and then those unhealthy clots start to form. Okay, how do you create inflammation? Well, poor diet and lifestyle, smoking, you know, consumption of different chemicals and things that can hurt you over time. Okay, thrombocytopenia is a deficiency in circulating platelets. What's the function of platelets? They clot blood. If you don't have enough, then you're going to be a bleeder. Okay, so you can have spontaneous bleeding. Hemophilia is a hereditary bleeding disorder. Okay, these people have certain deficiencies. It's a very complicated formula of the different ingredients that you need in order to in a healthy way clot blood. Some people just do not have these ingredients. Okay, so they do have different medications that can help these people. So once you're diagnosed and they find out exactly what's going on, then they can give you the appropriate medication to help you with your bleeding disorder. Okay. All right, any questions on the blood? Okay, I'm going to go to blood vessels next. So that's also under a module. Okay. All right, blood vessels. We have arteries and veins. Okay, so arteries and veins. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. Okay, so this sentence says it a little funny. They carry blood from the heart to the body. Or arteries carry blood away from the heart. So yes, it goes from heart to the body. The arteries contain the oxygenated blood. Veins carry blood back to the heart. So they return blood from the body to the heart. And overall, this is the oxygenated blood. Veins have valves, one-way valves, and they are collapsible. So these tubes are kind of flimsy, whereas arteries are thick and do not collapse easily. These one-way valves are designed to constantly keep blood flowing toward the heart. Okay, so this is a vein. We're looking at a vein. Veins contain valves, one-way valves. As your muscles contract, it actually squeezes against the tube, forcing blood toward the heart. Okay, the blood can't really go backwards because of the valves. So the direction of flow is always toward the heart with your veins. Okay, the order of circulation starting with the heart. So as blood leaves the heart, it goes to the arteries. Okay, those are big tubes. Then they go to arterioles, which are smaller tubes. Then to your capillaries, which are very tiny tubes. Okay, all this is oxygenated. Then from the capillaries, the blood drains into venules. So venules and capillaries are the same size. They're in the same family. Capillaries deliver oxygen. Venules pick up carbon dioxide. From the venules, the tubes get bigger, they spill into the veins, and then they spill into the great veins. Now we're back to the heart. And at that point, you breathe out the CO2, you breathe in the oxygen. Blood gets saturated with oxygen. The heart pumps it to your body through the arteries, and the veins bring things back to the heart. Okay, this is the anatomy of an artery, and here's the anatomy of a vein. The tube part, the actual hole, right, the tube part that allows for blood flow is called a lumen. Okay, you want that lumen area to be smooth and continuous. So the inside part is called the tunica intima. The insidemost layer is called the tunica intima. The next layer out is called the tunica media. Okay, now write this down, this is your muscle layer. The tunica media is muscle layer. Now this is smooth muscle, but it's still a muscle, which means it has the ability to constrict. And the outsidemost layer is called the tunica externa. Here's the veins that have those one-way valves. Okay, that tunica media, which we said was the middle layer, which has the smooth muscle fibers. So what can occur at the smooth muscle fiber? Okay, well, you can write a couple things down. What occurs here is movement. So the blood vessels can actually move. So they can go from a small diameter to a large diameter, and then they can go back to a small diameter again. So the diameter of the blood vessels can actually change. Okay, this is called vasoconstriction when they get smaller, and vasodilation when they get bigger. Okay, this movement is called vasomotor. Vaso alluding to your tubes, right? Your arteries and veins, motor meaning movement. So vasomotor can contract and get small, or they can open up and dilate. Your sympathetic nervous system helps function this. Okay, your sympathetic nervous system helps function the dilation constriction. All right, so vasoconstriction, which means small diameter, vasodilation, or opens up to a bigger diameter. The capillaries are the smallest of all the blood vessels. They are made of a single layer of squamous epithelial tissue. And remember, the function of a single layer of tissue, we talked about this a long time ago. When you have a really thin layer of tissue, that is good for, okay, write this down, diffusion, absorption, secretion. Thick layers are for protection, abrasion resistance, but thin layers are for diffusion, absorption, and secretion. Well, what do you think capillaries are constantly allowing to diffuse out of them? Oxygen, and to diffuse in CO2. So it's a gas. So capillaries' job is to help with the exchange of gases and nutrients to tissue. Here's a picture of that. Okay, you've got the red blood cell, and oxygen is being delivered to tissue, and the tissue is giving up some things that don't belong there. They put it back into the bloodstream so you can get rid of it, either breathe it out or pee it out. Okay, so there's different ways our body gets rid of waste. Okay, and your blood delivers good stuff to tissue and picks up the byproducts, and your body will get rid of it. Okay, so these things travel through the capillaries in one of three different ways. Direct diffusion, okay, gases can just diffuse across membranes. Diffusion through a cleft, right, so you have an opening that things can diffuse through, or through a pore, which is a bigger opening. Things can go through a pore. All right, some of the blood vessels I'd like for you to know. Carotid artery, okay, found in your neck. Radial artery, found on the thumb side of your forearm. Okay, the ulnar artery, which is found on the ulnar side, so that's the pinky side. The aorta, which is this big artery that comes out of the heart. Okay, that's the aorta. The thoracic aorta, which is this part, okay, this tube. So you have the aorta, and then it starts going down. Okay, so this big area that you see here, that's the thoracic aorta, and it's named after because it's in the thoracic cage. Then you have the abdominal aorta, which is right here. So the aorta comes down, turns into the thoracic aorta, and then turns into the abdominal aorta. So it's the same tube, it just changes names depending on location. So once you're in the abdomen, then they call it the abdominal aorta. Then you have the femoral artery, which is this blood vessel here in the thigh area. It's named after the bone. Okay, it's next to the femur, so that's why they call it the femoral artery. Okay, with the veins, right, we have jugular vein, which is found in the neck. Okay. Superior vena cava. Superior means on top of. So it's this huge vein that is on top of the heart. Okay, remember, veins bring blood into the heart. So veins bring blood from the body to the heart. Okay, veins bring blood back to the heart. Okay, so you have the superior and inferior vena cava. They're named off a location. The one on top of is the superior vena cava. The one on the bottom of the heart is the inferior vena cava. The median cubital vein is right here. This is the site of a common site for a blood draw. Okay, a very common site for a blood draw. And that's what the answer to this is. What is unique about the median cubital vein? It's a very common site for a blood draw. All right, you have the great saphenous vein, which is the longest vein in the leg. It goes from the crotch area all the way down to your foot. Okay, great saphenous vein. From the groin area all the way down to your foot. Okay, what's unique about the great saphenous vein is they can actually remove this and use it for bypass surgery in the heart. So if your heart blood vessels are damaged, they will take out your great saphenous vein and use those tubes to do a bypass surgery in your heart. Okay, hypertension is high blood pressure. Okay, hypertension is just a fancy word for high blood pressure. Okay, normal is 120 over 80, normal average, 120 over 80. So if your score is 140 over 90 or greater, then you have hypertension or high blood pressure. Okay, hypertension or high blood pressure can create hypertrophy of the heart, which means abnormal enlargement, usually in the left ventricle area. If left untreated or you just let it ride, can lead to heart failure. Hypertension or high blood pressure increases your risk for arteriosclerosis, which is damage to your blood vessels. Yeah, the damage is hardening of the arteries. You do not want your arteries to be hardened. Atherosclerosis is where you get fat deposits on the blood vessel walls. Okay, lipid deposits or fat deposits on the intima, that tunica intima, the inside lining of the arteries. This can lead to scar tissue. So fibrosis is scar tissue, and calcium comes in, not good for your blood vessels. This can limit blood flow and cause a thrombus and an embolism. And remember, the embolism is what can cause a stroke. Okay, any questions on blood vessels?